Would you look at that? It's time for another Collection Connection, the game that's really just an excuse to talk about records. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the album that my brother showed from his record collection this past Monday, and then I'm going to connect that to an album in my own collection that shares a facet or quirk with it. I'll throw out hints to the connecting factor, but I'm not going to spell it out because your part in this game is to guess what it is. First up today is the 8th studio album from the long-running LA punk band Bad Religion with 1994's Stranger Than Fiction. After that, I'll talk about my pick, which is another long-running band, this one out of Sydney, Australia, 1980s college radio darlings, The Church, with their 5th studio album, 1988's Starfish. Now there's clearly a suggestion of a connection just through faith-based band names, but I'll save you the guess and tell you that that's not it. It's also not about their deep discographies, at least not directly. There's your first clue. If you do have a guess, put it down in the comments, and the first right answer will get a shout out in my brother's next video. But first, let's reveal the connection between the previous pair of albums, those being Bad Religion's Stranger Than Fiction and Joe Jackson's Laughter and Lust. Eric mentioned, Eric being my brother over on the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel, that it was kind of a double connection this time. The first and more obvious of those is that in addition to being the title of the album, Stranger Than Fiction, Bad Religion had a single, a title track called Stranger Than Fiction, as did Joe Jackson's Laughter and Lust, had a single called Stranger Than Fiction. In addition to that, they are both the first albums that each artist recorded for their second record label. Joe Jackson had been on A&M throughout his entire career, and he moved to Virgin for Laughter and Lust. And Bad Religion was on Epitaph from the beginning. Band member Gurwitz, I'm going to forget his first name, is it Greg? Being kind of a label owner for Epitaph. And as Eric mentioned, they moved to a new label for Stranger Than Fiction. I forget now in the moment what that label was. And technically, they had put out the previous album, Recipe for Hate, like re-released it after Epitaph had initially released it. So I think they signed the band in 1993, reissued their current album, but Stranger Than Fiction was the first album recorded specifically for that new contract. And so, as time of my recording here, nobody got it. And so, with that, I guess we can move on with the show. Alright, so Eric talked about Bad Religion's Stranger Than Fiction. It's not an album that I'm familiar with, although I am familiar with the band Bad Religion. I think Eric mentioned that he got turned on to them around the time of Generator. I think that is probably where I diverged paths, I guess. With them, I'm familiar, I think, with their slightly earlier period, maybe like Suffer, Against the Grain, that kind of thing. It was a band that a friend of mine, a mutual friend of ours back in the day, had some Bad Religion records. I sort of equated them with Social Distortion in my head, in that both have kind of punk leanings. Maybe Bad Religion is kind of walking the line between metal and punk, kind of very hard punk. But I think the vocals and the subject matter of the lyrics probably makes all the difference in that classification. So they're very much, I think the band name Bad Religion is not specifically focused on religion. It's about nonconformity. And so their lyrics, their songs, a lot of it are about, questioning everything and taking on authority and not conforming to groupthink. So that, I think, probably pushes them more into the punk category, whereas Social Distortion never really came off as metal, but more like punk via Americana, kind of Johnny Cash rock and roll. I think just the fact that I was familiar with them in the same era, and they had those kind of raspy vocals. Another thing that probably makes the difference between metal and music that I can enjoy. Both bands were melodic and sang in a range that I could sing along with if I wanted to. So even though I'm not familiar with Stranger Than Fiction, and I would agree it maybe started to feel a little samey, there's certainly a reliance on a particular sort of driving beat that's that boom bum ba boom bum ba boom bum ba. That kind of beat seemed like it popped up over and over again, making it hard to differentiate the songs on just what was a cursory listen, but certainly didn't bother me. Eric noted that it was their biggest seller, but I was already far away from Bad Religion. I stopped thinking about them when I left California in 1991. This came out in 1994, and they were no longer on my radar anywhere. I never heard anything from this album. So it was all new to me, but it seemed pretty Bad Religion to me, which means that it's not terrible. It wasn't terrible to me. I liked what they did, but I never liked what they did enough that I actually went and bought any albums. I considered it any number of times, but I never actually bought a Bad Religion album. Unlike, I do have now a couple of Social Distortion albums. I think they probably hit my sweet spot a little closer than Bad Religion. But I liked it when the roommate and friend would play some Bad Religion. I was definitely into it, enjoyed it. But yeah, that's kind of where I am on Bad Religion. Nice to cue them up here after 30 years or so since the last time I listened to them. And so for my what do these bands possibly have in common connection, I have gone with Starfish from The Church. This is the album that features Under the Milky Way along with Reptile, and I think Antenna maybe was another single from this that was a staple of MTV's 120 Minutes back in the day, so I was very familiar with especially Under the Milky Way back in that time, and it's sort of singular, that song, Under the Milky Way. It has a perfectly sort of dreamy tone to it. Nothing else, even from The Church, really sounds exactly like it to me. And as much as I liked the song, even back then, it wasn't an album that I bought. I didn't follow up on them. I thought Reptile was okay. I will note that some people, my wife included, like Reptile better than Under the Milky Way. Not to say that they don't like Under the Milky Way, but their favorite is Reptile from this album. And it took until the 2010s, maybe sometime in the last 10 years, for me to actually buy this album. I came across a nice 2-disc remaster expansion from 2012 from Second Motion, apparently, maybe a subsidiary of Sony Music. And yeah, I can see why this is the album where they made waves in America. Not by comparison, not that I'm familiar with their earlier work at all, but it's very consistent through and through. It's funny that it was not really a bigger hit anywhere. It's a little like I Melt With You in that respect. I think it's a song that has long legs, but modern English is I Melt With You, as large as it looms in the memory, was not really a hit at any point. It just felt like it was, and that seems to be the case with Under the Milky Way as well. It didn't dominate the charts anywhere, either in Australia, in their home country, or in the US. It was kind of their biggest hit, relatively speaking. Maybe they're only one to crack the top 40, but was not like an enduring hit. The album did, I think, a little better, hit maybe the low teens on the US Billboard charts. But again, I didn't buy it at that time. But since I bought it, I have tended to consume it as a full album, kind of listen to it beginning to end, which has made it a little more difficult for individual tracks necessarily to stand out for me. It is good background music while you're doing stuff. I like stuff that isn't so shapeless and formless and soundscapey that it's just sort of elevator noise, but it is not so domineering that you have to pay attention to it in the moment. And that tends to be kind of the sweet spot where I listen to or decide to put on the Church's Starfish album. It starts off with Destination, which I like, and Under the Milky Way is the second song. I know Antenna has caught my ear, and maybe that makes me think that it's a single, but it actually isn't. But it is a song that I like, that I feel like could have been a single, even if it wasn't. Most of the songs are sung by Steve Kilbey, but interestingly to me, one song apiece, a Spark, and I forget which one is the other one, sung by two other band members on lead vocals. So even though Steve Kilbey was on lead vocals most of the time, they did share lead vocal duties. I don't know if that is a thing that they did throughout their career or not, but it happened here on this album. And we did eventually get the follow-up to this. So I have Gold Afternoon Fix, forget the order of it. Something we picked up in a secondhand shop that I haven't given as much time of day. But those are the only two church albums that I have. But like a lot of people, especially in the U.S., Starfish is the one must-have album, unless you're a big fan of their many records they've had since. So this was their fifth, and they've put out many records since. But again, that's not the connection. The connection is specific to the album that we're talking about, Bad Religion's Stranger Than Fiction, Starfish by the Church. It is something unique to each of these albums within that large discography. So if you think you have a guess as to what it is, you can put that guess down in the comments. And on Monday, my brother Eric, Plastic Eric, over on the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel, will put out his video connecting something to Starfish, and he will shout out whoever gets a right answer first. So you can look forward to that on Monday. And until then, that's all I have. So thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Good show, Ponsonby.